In this lecture on participant observation, I would like to focus a bit on participation. But first I would like to say something about why should we do participant observation. And there are several reasons for that. The first reason is that it provides many different kinds of data. For instance, if you participate and you observe and you write little notes about it, these little notes are a certain type of data, field notes. But you also make pictures probably, or you make videos or audio recordings. And maybe you collect some data in the sense of documents that people give you or you can lay hand on. So you gather all kinds of data. Second reason why I think participant observation is an important method, it provides naturally occurring data, which means that things go on as usual when you're there. Well, obviously there's some reactivity, as it's called. There's some reactivity. People react on you as a participant observer. But if you stay for a prolonged period of time, then probably the data you gather is naturally occurring. Way more natural, probably, than what you have when you do an interview. Thirdly, participant observation provides in-depth data. Because you stay for a prolonged period of time and get a little deeper. So you can dig a little deeper, you learn to know some people and you learn to know how stuff works. It's not superficial, one-time hit of data gathering. Well, the fourth reason why we should do participant observation is it's contextualized data. So it's naturally occurring, it's in-depth, but it's also contextualized, so rather broad, within a certain context. And especially if you stay for a longer period of time, this context becomes clearer and clearer and clearer. There's a historical context as well as a social context. More on that later, obviously. It provides data, but it also facilitates other methods. For instance, when doing participant observation, you can learn so much of a special group or a special social situation that a preparation for an interview is pretty easy. Preparation for a survey study is pretty easy because you already did a pre-study. So it works great as a pre-study because of this contextualized knowledge, because of this in-depth knowledge. And it helps also a lot on interpretation of, for instance, survey results. So participant observation is an important method. But the main thing for me is it's the coolest research method. Because you can go out, participate with people, study them at the same time. There are some special features of participant observation. And many authors write a lot about access. And in this course, we won't be discussing much on access, but access is very important. Obviously, participation is important. Your background, your skills, and your impression management. I will explain them later. What is also important is, obviously, observation. And observation meaning watching, listening, smelling, feeling, and tasting. And some would say posing questions as well. And the fourth important feature of participant observation is writing. And later on in this course, we will say something about writing as well. Let's talk about personal background. Because when you try to observe a naturally occurring situation, you bring yourself in. So people react on you. There's reactivity. Your age, your gender, your class, your ethnicity, your religion, they all play a role. And not just your age, your gender, class, ethnicity, religion, but many other features as well. And some of those features you can't really change easily. Well, you can pretend to be of a higher class, or you could pretend a certain religion, but usually it's a bit hard to change in ethnicity and gender as well. And there's a last part of it, because if people perceive you to be of a certain age, a certain gender, a certain ethnicity, then it doesn't really matter whether you are really of a certain ethnicity or religion. The perception is there. So when you do participant observation, you have to deal with those stuff. It's not just background. where you have to reflect on. You also have to reflect on your personal skills. And there are quite some skills necessary for participant observation. The first is language skills. I studied Tamil for 1 year before doing fieldwork in Sri Lanka. And I really tried hard in writing and reading Tamil. And when I came in Sri Lanka, I didn't understand a word of the people, and the people didn't understand a word from me. Simply because my Tamil was a classical Tamil, and their Tamil was, as they call it, Kochi Tamil, broken Tamil, they say. So, in the end, do you need to do a language course, or do you need just some phrases? Probably some phrases is often easier and maybe better. In some cases, when you do a research participant observation among bankers, it's really useful to learn the jargon. But not just the bankers, also people on the street, homeless people or whatever. So you need language skills. Do you need to mimic? When I did fieldwork in Sri Lanka, I started doing like this, which is very common. But is it making fun of them, or is it mimicking them in a positive way? I try to mean it as a positive thing, but how do people react on it? That's a very important issue in participant observation. Another personal skill, totally different skill, is to create something I call explicit attention. So be really attentive to what is going on around you. What do people do? And you have to take notes all the time, not just on paper, but also in your head. And you have to train this explicit attention. You also have to train your memory, because you enter a social situation, you enter a village, and you want to look around, and you want to see what is going on, and you want to remember it afterwards. You can't take notes all the time, so you have to work on your memory. And these two go together pretty well. There are other skills, and these skills are a bit vaguer and probably more difficult. And these skills are astonishment and naivety. It means that you have to stay a little bit naive all the time. You have to stay, as a participant researcher, a little bit naive when people tell you the stories you've heard before. Because maybe there's something new in it, or maybe you can learn something new from it. So you have to try to be fresh and open, to be a little bit detached while at the same time being involved. And that's pretty difficult. We'll discuss that later. You also need analytical imagination. And probably you can't get an analytical imagination just sitting in your chair watching a MOOC. Probably you have to go out and train yourself in fieldwork as well as analytics. So try to interpret data. Try to interpret social situation. And the last skill is writing. And writing is a skill you can train, and you have to train that in order to do good participant observation. Because in the end you have to write it down. And if you're a great participator, if you're a great observer, it doesn't mean a thing if you can't write it down. So a classical distinction in participant observation has been made by Juncker and Gold. And what they say is, well, as a participant observer, you play different roles. Now, one role is the role of someone who's relatively involved, and he or she might be called an observing participant, whereas others might be a little bit detached and a participating observant. And the extreme of the roles are either observant or participant. So what they say is, as a researcher, you pick a role, and then in the end you stick with that role. Most research methodologists nowadays would say, well, sometimes you're an observing participant. When you're dancing in a religious festival and you're part of it, you're probably not observing that properly. Well, maybe you're observing how not to step on someone's toe, but you're not observing the social situation that good. So maybe you're more of a participant or an observing participant. Whereas at the same festival, after a while you sit down, you take your notebook and you start observing. You're a fly on the wall watching. The only way to deal with this is to reflect on it, because it means that the kind of data you gather here or you gather when playing this role is a little bit different. And you have to reflect on that. When talking about impression management, many people seem to think that impression management is something negative, but it's not. We do impression management all the time. When I'm taking the bus, I'm not talking to the bus driver like this. So when I'm taking the bus, I just give my card and so on. I play a role, the role of passenger. Well, when presenting for you in this MOOC, I'm playing the role of teacher. And it's different from playing the role of father or husband or football player. Pretty bad one, actually. So how do you present yourself? That's impression management. And that depends on your research topic, the situation in your research. And for every researcher, this is probably slightly different. Sometimes you can present yourself as a researcher. I'm a researcher, I'm doing research on this and that. But you can only do that when people understand more or less what a researcher does. So if people expect you to enter in a white coat, well, to act to them as laboratory rats, they won't really like you and won't probably be the best way to present yourself. And in participant observation, many people pose themselves as younger sister or younger brother, or as a fellow mother. And a very good role we can use is the role of a student, because a student poses questions all the time. A younger sister or a younger brother poses questions all the time. So it's really easy to take on this role as a participant observer. A fellow mother has probably the same experiences, so you can discuss these experiences. A fellow father probably as well. In general, this is the role that is often suggested, the role of an interested outsider, the role of the professional stranger. Goffman, the one who wrote a lot on impression management, once said, as a field worker, you sometimes have to play the donkey's ass. You have to be more stupid than you really are. And why? Well, simply because of this impression management. So, we've been talking about the background that is playing a role, the personal skills that are playing a role, and impression management. And I have to preach a bit. So you have to be aware of those. You have to be aware of these backgrounds, of your skills or lack of skills, lack of language skills in my case, and you have to reflect on it. You have to think, is this a disadvantage or an advantage? In what sense is this an advantage and in what sense is it a disadvantage? And how does it affect the quality of my material? How does it affect the relation with people and so the depth or the contextuality of the information? And thirdly, never forget, how ethical is it? So, how many lies are white lies? How many impression management is okay? And all these things you have to reflect on in order to do good participant observation.